Hey folks, here are OS Reviews. Today you're watching our video review of the ZTE Open. This is the world's first Firefox phone, but as opposed to many Android, iOS, and Windows phones currently on the market, the first Firefox phone is actually a very meek and entry-level smartphone. In fact, it only has a 3.5-inch screen, it has a 3.1 megapixel camera, and it has a 1 gigahertz processor and 256 megabytes of RAM. And so, although it isn't super slow, it definitely doesn't perform as well as in flagship devices currently on the market. With that being said, the ZTE Open can be found for just $70 online through eBay, and the phone comes completely unlocked, which means that it's definitely a steal in terms of the price tag. Yet the most interesting thing about the phone, of course, is going to be its operating system, something that's built entirely on HTML, and as a result, you have a very web and cloud-based experience that requires a lot of connectivity either via 3G or Wi-Fi to the internet. The biggest question of the Firefox phone, or the ZTE Open, is whether it can still compete with an already crowded market of smartphones that's currently being dominated by iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. And so in this review, we'll explore all of these questions. Taking a first look at the hardware of the handset, it's actually surprisingly well made for something that's only $70. Like with the entire theme of Firefox OS, you see this orange rubber being crafted around the handset, and it feels pretty solid in the hand despite not being made out of metal or anything like that. The front is dominated again by that 3.5-inch display and also a home key that's capacitive. The very top features the earpiece and the ZTE logo, and on the left-hand spine you'll find access to the volume rocker, which is pretty tactile and easy to press, and on the very top there's a 3.5mm headphone jack and also a power and on-off switch. The back features a loudspeaker that's decent, although it's not very rich sounding, and also the fixed focus camera that lacks a flash, as well as a self-portrait mirror. On the very bottom, you find access to a micro USB for charging and syncing, and there's nothing on the other side. Removing the back cover will allow you to find access to a micro SD card for expanding the built-in memory, which is, by the way, only 512 megabytes, and also you have access to a SIM card slot, because again, this is a quad-band GSM world phone. Now, when you unlock the device, you'll see that the home screen is a bit different from anything we've seen perhaps from Android or from iOS. Instead, we have this drag-down drawer, and we can either access the camera or unlock the device by tapping on the main screen of Firefox OS 1.0 is composed of the time, date information, and a bottom row of applications that you have access to at all times throughout the user experience. So, for example, there is an access to the radio, a camera, a Firefox mobile browser. There's also a MMS text messaging client, and also a phone dialer pad. We simply press on the home key to exit out of an application, and I can long press on the home key to bring up a list of all the currently open applications. So this is basically the multitasking functionality of Firefox OS. If I want to exit out of an application or shut it down entirely, I simply swipe it up from the top of the screen, and now I have the application closed. So in a sense, the multitasking on here is very strong because I have these different cards I can select from, and it's quite reminiscent of WebOS that was brought out by Palm and also later on by HP, or it's also similar to BlackBerry's Playbook in the sense that multitasking is a very easy to use ordeal. Sliding to the left reveals a list of applications that you have to have access to the internet to actually open and use. This is where the HTML aspect of Firefox really comes out and shines. So for example, if I tab on the social, it brings up everything social. So there's Facebook, Twitter, there's Flickr, there's Instagram, Reddit. It seems like there's a lot of applications that are pre-installed onto the phone. But I would say pre-installed using air quotes here because they're not actually like data, like hard applications that are installed that you would find on an Android phone. Instead, if you tap on an application, it brings up basically it takes you into the web browser and then takes you into a version that's been optimized for the phone specifically. Now, the benefit of something like this is it's very light on storage, so we don't need a lot of storage to actually run a ton of applications. But the downside is you don't have a lot of offline applications. You have to have access to the internet to access everything here. With that being said, you don't need to really install any more apps because you already have so many that you can simply tap on and access. So there are different tabs that you can see some applications that are on here already. For example, for local, there's FM radio, there's a lot of Google Maps for navigation. There is GPS on this phone, by the way, in addition to Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, although data is capped at 3G connectivity. There's also local, there's a weather tab for checking the weather and date. There's AccuWeather, WeatherBug, TV applications there. You have some additional apps from Google, from about.com. There's also a YouTube client that takes you basically into the web browser that supports YouTube playback, but you get the same experience if you just go into the Firefox browser and then tap on it and go to youtube.com. So overall, the experience, it works, but it's not as polished or optimized as some applications for Android would be, but at the same time, it's a lot faster to load as long as you have an internet connection. Sliding to the right of the screen gives you access to more, I would say, offline apps, although some of these still require internet connectivity. So for example, we have access to the gallery, to an email client, to our contacts, our settings, a calculator, a video player, and you also have some additional built-in apps from Wikipedia, a clock, AccuWeather, and a few more like YouTube over there. So all of these work pretty nicely as well. So I can tap on the calculator, for example, and then exit out of that by tapping on the home key. There's also haptic feedback on this phone. So whenever you tap on something like the home key, it vibrates just like if you're pressing on an actual button. Now, there's also a notification drawer, just like on Android and also on the new iOS. You can slide that down to have access to new notifications for updates and also to turn on and off the various wireless options like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS, and it works pretty well. Something I will say about this specific phone, the ZTE Open, is that the touchscreen isn't as responsive as I really want it to be, or I think that it really could be. It's a capacitive touchscreen, so for most things it's fine, but you'll notice that if you go really fast on the screen, a lot of your taps won't be registered. You kind of have to be very precise in where you're hitting the screen and then be very slow and patient with it. It's probably not something that has to do with the processor. It's more with the touchscreen display. I wish it was a bit more high quality, but at the same time, it definitely works for most basic tasks. There's a bit of sluggishness here and there, but it's not anything too crippling or too bad. If I go into the web browser, again, we have Firefox OS, which actually is a pretty reliable and nice web browser to actually use. It brings up the virtual keyboard here. You can see the keyboard is pretty cramped and small and a little bit difficult to use. There is an accelerometer though, so I can tilt the screen. It becomes a lot more comfortable. So if I wanted to search the New York Times, I can tap on there, and it's going to search using Google. And the pages do load pretty quickly, surprisingly, for a 1 gigahertz processor. So if you do want to do some light web browsing, I would say that the Firefox OS definitely allows you to do that, especially if you use the mobile version of different sites. You can see the text and documents will load. Loading up the complex site or the desktop site takes a bit longer, however. Here we have the full version of the New York Times kind of partially loaded. It's taking quite a while, again, because of our low connection, and also because the phone, of course, only has a single core processor, so things are a bit slower. The screen resolution is 480 by 320, so it's not HD by any stretch of the imagination, but text as far as the phone is concerned, the ZTE Open actually is a pretty good handset. The microphone on here does a good job of picking up sound even if you are in louder environments, although there isn't active noise cancellation. The dial pad is large and easy to press, and icons are generally pretty pleasing to the eye, and overall we have a pretty responsive earpiece, and the call quality in general has had pretty strong reception when we tested it with both AT&T as well as T-Mobile here in Seattle, Washington. So pretty good results from the phone department, which is always nice, because again, even though a smartphone has a ton of features, it has to be a phone for most. Other features on the handset, again, is pretty much developing, just like on the browser there. You can see we have an email client, but it's not as developed, again, as Gmail would be on an Android phone, for example. With that being said, it definitely works, and notifications will be pushed onto the top of the notification drawer when it comes in and you have a new message. Clicking on the YouTube app, you can also see it basically is a link to the browser version of the YouTube client, but it's going to load. It does work. In terms of video resolution, it actually does play back clips that are relatively impressive. It's not full HD, but it's not terrible either. So if I wanted to search on OS reviews, there is predictive entry, by the way, for the keyboard. So it's actually going to tell me if I'm typing something correctly or not, and it actually shows up on a recommendation bar on the side there, so that's a nice feature to have. I'm going to click on a video that I have uploaded, and we'll see how that works. So let's just click on the first video we see there. And again, loading speeds are going to be a bit longer than your average, perhaps, Android phone, just because we are on firmware version 1.0. But you can see how, as far as the video has been loaded, it actually plays back pretty smoothly and nicely. Sound is pretty loud on the phone. Again, the speaker does a good job of playing back sound, despite being a little bit on the tinier side of the spectrum. The screen on the ZTE Open actually is only okay. Viewing angles are decent if you're looking at the phone head-on, but if you start tilting the phone too much, you can see how it loses the saturation quite quickly. However, colors are generally accurate, and they're generally pretty vibrant if you, again, look at it correctly. The distance between the glass and the actual LCD panel is also quite wide. You can see how there's a bit of a distance and a gap there, which just kind of shows that ZTE cut a few corners just to make the cost. Programs that are pre-installed over here, again, we have a Wikipedia application. It's basically a bookmark into the web browser, but there are a few updates that you don't have if you just go directly into wikipedia.com. So for example, we have Firefox OS as kind of the default page that you go into if you open up the application. There are other different apps there, like a notes that you can create quick memo pads, and there's also a settings. Again, video, you can play back your built-in videos and songs if you want to do that. Contacts works as well, and also the same thing can be said about maps. If we take a quick look at the camera on here at 3 megapixels, it's nothing to write home about, but with proper lighting, it actually isn't too bad either. The biggest disappointment is the lack of autofocus, which means that shots are sometimes hit or miss. But with that being said, it takes a few seconds to capture a shot, and then you can tap on it to kind of pan back and forth almost between full screen mode and one screen mode. And I can tap on the bar over there to have access to my current image that I just took. I can also zoom in using pinch to zoom gestures, and you can see how most text is legible and colors are fairly accurate despite not being the sharpest camera in the world. I can also capture video, but it's not HD resolution, it's 480p resolution only. So I click on the gallery, I can also view my different images. I think the most interesting aspect about the ZTE Open is it comes with a large amount of GPS-oriented applications. So we have Here Maps, we have a Z Maps on there, and as you saw before, there's actually an application to Google Maps and navigation as well. So in total, we have like 4 or 5 different navigation apps that are pre-installed, which I found to be kind of interesting. So pressing on Marketplace, you can download a few more games and apps. The emphasis here is going to be on games because as you saw before, if you slide to the left of the home screen, you already have access to a lot of productivity apps. So you already are pretty fully decked in that department. The only thing that you really need are some ebook reading apps and some games, which you can take a look at. Now, as with any first generation marketplace, it's pretty much hindered by the number of applications that are available. So you're not going to find all the apps you have in the iOS store or the Android marketplace at the moment, but hopefully they will be there as we go down the road and see the operating system. I wanted to show you, for example, the clock here. If you tap on the clock, it actually allows you to transition back and forth between an analog and a digital style, which is interesting. And finally, there's also, we can take a look at the settings. It resembles Android in some departments where you have access to your connectivity, your internet settings, notifications, your language, your SIM card, and then it tells you your battery percentage and of course the device and the Firefox version that's being run. At the end of the day, I would say that the ZTE Open is an okay smartphone. It's not the best in terms of performance, and if you want to play back heavy games and a lot of web browsing, it's not going to be the best phone just because the screen is a bit small and the processor isn't as fast as some comparable devices on the market. But at $70, it's absolutely a deal for a unlocked GSM quad-band smartphone, and especially for something that runs on an operating system that I think is pretty unique and functional as far as multitasking is concerned. With that being said, there's a lot of rough corners that the phone needs to work out at the moment. So if you do want a really polished phone, I would say go for an Android product. You can find something in the same price bracket. But if you are kind of looking for something to explore with and you have some more patience, I would say the ZTE Open is a good phone and a good choice because call quality is good, battery life is good, and we have some rough edges that needs to be worked out as the operating system sees more upgrades down the road. So overall, the ZTE Open is an okay phone. I think that the platform has a lot of promise, and if you do need a backup phone or a phone for kids or a first smartphone, I think this is a good option to go with. You can check out more details in our official written review, but this has been our video review here at OS Reviews. This is the ZTE Open, the first commercial Firefox OS smartphone.